Welcome, my name is Craig West. If you've typed in this URL, you will come to an HTML site that deploys WordPress functionality and content using WP-HTML using a combination of the REST API and web components. This is page 1. This navbar is a web component, and if we go into the category section where we're displaying more posts and we see this back to top screen, that too is a web component. Let's have a very quick look at the source code, and we can see here that all there is on this page are some custom HTML elements, HTML tags that we can create for ourselves using web components native to the browser. And we see in this one here we're showing all posts for a particular category, and that's it displayed there with its JavaScript file. So what we've done here, as we can see, is, for example, if we go to the home page, we're showing one particular post using this endpoint, but very easily we can change programmatically to another post, so we could enable users of this component to make their own programmatic changes. If we look at the source code, what we can see here is we have the web component just here. It's picking one post, 106, but another site can just use some basic JavaScript and the DOM to basically add more functionality. So if we come back here, we see this. We can also go into DevTools, and to show how these custom elements can respond very quickly, we can see that if we come in here, open up, we can see if we change this back to 106 as a demonstration, we can see that it's been changed here. What you can notice here is I've got some other custom components that are loading IndexedDB. So if we go to the application tab, I'm using the IndexedDB, the database within the browser, to load all the posts for each category. And in this example, I'm just selecting author name, content, ID and title. But as you can see here, we've got 4 different categories. Which means if we come across to, say, the PWA page, we can very easily just load in different categories as we wish. Now these are instant pages. Anything under 100 milliseconds is considered to be instant by the brain. But because it's stored in IndexedDB, if I were to go offline, we could now see that these pages are still loaded because WordPress has become client-side. So let's go back online and let's have a look at a range of these different web components that we can offer. And these are front-end services, microservices. We've seen we can just display a particular category here. We can even, if we want to, load pages in dynamically. Let's go to F12 again to see this in action. And if we go to the network tab, pick all, refresh the page just to start with, we're loading in stuff. Let's clear this now. And if we load the component in, we can see we're now loading in the data and the JavaScript files and all the things we need on demand. So it means really we don't need to, we can have quicker pages because only as we're crossing certain thresholds do we load in data. And this can be seen very nicely in the so-called lazy load component. In this, the component has the built-in intersection observer API. So if we're using this as our threshold line, which would normally be below the screen, below the fold, if we come in, we can see how images and posts are loaded on demand. And if we look at the source code, we can see that we're using so-called lazy load web components with an ID for the particular post or the photo. These are just our custom elements that can be assigned and even programmatically changed. So going back to the site, we've seen single post, that could be just a plain page and we can change it. We can see displaying a whole list of posts. We've seen dynamic loading. we can also have the proverbial blog. Apologies, that's been my testing earlier today. And this, because it's stored in the browser, would still work offline. If we go F12, offline, as it's stored in the browser memory, if we lose connection, we can still see all these posts, rather like we did in PWA, but it's not stored in the database, it's just stored in browser memory. So if we go back online, we can also use forms. And what I've done here, this is a complete component. This will log in to WordPress or any other backend, but in this case it's a WordPress backend. Come back with a JSON web token. It comes back with as much information as we want to provide that can be stored, that solves the issue of authentication when one's not in the WordPress ecosystem. So all of this is just web components, and if we look at this particular page, all we've done is we're loading our nav bar through a web component, and here we have our web component which authenticates. And if we have a little look at the code going through, we can see we have a class that extends the HTML element and a lot of JavaScript code that provides this nice UI interaction of validation, live validation, checking the form before posting it off to actually get the data that we need and the verification. So if we come on down, we can see we define our element at the bottom here, and if we work our way up top, we can see we do a fetch request to our endpoint REST API, and when we come back, we're getting back our JSON web token, as well as more information if we want it that we can now display. So going back, we can see that here once more time, typing it in. So this form could be anything. It's just one example of a form that can basically interact with our WordPress backend to provide functionality and content. So that's WP-HTML using WordPress and web components through the REST API to create micro front ends, HTML plugins, or function as a service.